Okay, so let's continue. There was some question about pot odds. So there was about some hand and where to get certain of about amount of yeah. So the question was if I watch like solid player streaming or playing, he has like king 10 suited blinds are 100 to 200. Heroes on button MP2 raises to 450 and 10 hero says I need like 30% to call and I'll get that with king 10 suited. So where he knows how much he needs to call, what is the 30%. Well, in that case, I would assume that when someone talks about 30%, he's talking about equity against his opponent range, basically. And of course, when we are talking about simpler situation, would be that we are in PP and someone is, for example, let's say someone is min raising from button. Without antis, we would have 1 PP to call for pot of 4.5 PP. So our pot odds would be, if we use calculator, for example, for it to see it exactly, it would be 22%. And if we think about what sort of hands have 22% on wide range, then we pretty quickly get that we have equity to call with anything. But you have to also remember that if we use some sort of tool like, let's say, equilator to check our equity against certain, so we can basically choose like 7 dues, and if we choose some sort of button range, let's say it's 35 or something, then we get that 7 dues has 29% of equity pre-flop. But there is also the side of how well you can actually realize that equity through the post-flop. So for example, a hand like 7 dues off, it's not going to be hitting basically anything playable most of the time, so you will have tough time to realize that 30% equity. So there is also the side of playability with the hand. But of course, if you in the example from this chat, if you have king 10 suited from position, you also have playable hand and position to help you. So it's pretty decent situation to be in. So I talked first to talk a bit about a tool called ICM Explorer, which I think is pretty decent to go through some of the, or like play around with the ICM side. So let's say that we are in 9 max bubble, and for example we want to check that what sort of ICM taxes we have in different sort of situations. So let's say that we have, well, it's not with 25 anti in those blind levels, but well, let's say that something like that. And we can basically play away with the ICM tax in a way that, for example, let's say that we have 3000 stack here on the PP. We have chip leader here, and then we have a couple small stacks. And if we check for example here that the caller is on the big blind and some of the shorter stacks is going to be shoving, we will get with the call pass button that chip odds would be 40.5%, and there is ICM tax of 6%. So equity needed is going to be 46.7%. But for example, what sort of, I could ask you from you that what sort of risk premium or ICM tax you believe to be in 9max bubble if we check same situation that the one shoving is this chip leader. Is it going to differ much from this 6% against small stack? Here you can see the structure of 9max, that it's 50% to winner and 30 and 20%. And this tool is free for 9max, this 50, 30, 20 structure, but I think it was something like $20 to get the full version where there is a lot of different sort of formats, and you can also have your own defined here. Well, this would be kind of interesting structure, over 100%. Does anyone want to guess what the ICM tax would be? Well, anyway, it's going to be hugely different in this case, something like 25% probably, 26.5%. So we are risking the same amount, but the point is that, or we are not risking the same amount, but well, we could also add 3000 here for comparison. So it's going to increase here against bigger stack, of course, because the ICM. Well, I actually forgot to ask about ICM in first place from you guys, that, or like say that it's quite common that ICM in term is familiar to many players, but it's actually something that if you ask from different people that what can you describe what ICM is, it's often that you don't really get good answer or clear answer. But in simple terms, the ICM comes from independent chip model, and it's only model to define value for your chips in current tournament situation. There's not really anything else that it does. So what the model says that not all the chips are basically as valuable, like, because for example in 9max structure, even if you have all the chips on the game, it's only 50% of the prize pool. So basically chips won are less valuable than chips lost. So that's one of the reasons why ICM tax comes into play. Yeah, as Alex says, that it calculates chips value, and that's also one of the interesting things when analyzing your games, that play around with different stack sizes. Because for example, if we here change it back to 1500, there is quite a lot of difference if the chip leader is clearly bigger than you. For example, here we can see that ICM tax is 26%, but if we decrease the size of the chip leader, let's say to 4000, it's going to decrease a lot. This ICM tax is going to be decreasing quite a lot, around 3%, even if we are risking all of our chips in both cases. And the main reason is that if we double through in this situation, we double through the small blind, then our stack value will be much higher, because we then have clearly the biggest stack in the game. Yeah, you can edit it here with the full version. For example, 6max format. You can have your like MTT SNG games. You can define these are actually not updated. 180 man is still 18-bit, but you can define your own price structures as well. So mostly I'm using this tool or have been using it to play around quickly with these different sort of situations and see how the ICM tax changes. But there is also other functions. I don't really remember most of these anymore, but you can get information about them by clicking here. There is going to be some info, if I remember correctly. Was it here from the about? Well, somewhere anyway. You can play around with the tool. It's kind of engineer type, tricky looking user interface, but it can be a quick tool to check those different situations and really like understand why is it that we have to fold some ace king, for example, in 9-man bubble sometimes, and so on. So for example here, if we are in 9-man bubble, we see that we would need 69 or 70% of equity, and if we then use the equilator, did I close it? Seems like so. It was here. So if we have ace king suited, for example, and random range, we don't have 70% of equity against random hand pre-flop. So I think this is decently convenient, and it's going to be free for the 9max structure, so you can try it out. It was actually here on the tutorials. I think that, yeah, in here you can get different sort of explanations on these, what they are supposed for. So then, did we want to go through about the Hold'em resources calculator? Because it has been a tool that we have been using a lot in different coachings. Well, I will first go asking what about that Flopzilla. We can also go through it a bit later, but let's first go for Hold'em resources. And this is basically a tool for pre-flop game analyzing, where you can really easily choose different sort of hands. If we quickly find some all in pre-flop situation. Well, some sort of reasonable looking spot. Well, in here we have a6 shooter, for example, from the UTG. 6 pp deep, with the anti-adjusted just 4 pp deep. We can just right click here and copy the hand and just choose the basic hand and paste from clipboard. And of course choose the correct structure, which is obviously quite important. And then we have these different sort of options here, that if we are interested about chip EV, and chip EV I would basically only use in, for example, MTTs in early or middle stages where there is no ICM implications at all. But then, and maybe like in MTTs, if you are in bubble, you probably want to add some sort of ICM, but if you have just gotten into monies, it's often going to be pretty much chip EV game, because the price steps are so small for quite a while. So that's also a situation where using chip EV is totally reasonable. And basically, if we use this ICM options, we are going through about the single hand accounting ICM, and with FGS it also accounts into future hand. So if you are, for example, in this hand, it's going to be pretty important that we are hitting the big blind on the next hand, which will decrease our equity, or not equity, but the value of our stack quite much. For the Twitch chat, the coaching prices should be totally correct in our private coaching area. And from here you can find simulation depth, for example, that how many future hands you can want to be going through. Can be reasonable to use 2 or maybe 3 sometimes, but over that calculation will just get so huge that it's not reasonable anymore. So you can get get better results considering the future hands that way. And for example, here when we analyze this, we should first look basically that A6 suited, it's going to be plus EV with these assumptions. And then we of course want to always think about the table where we are and are these ranges reasonable and so on. And also something to always check is that what sort of different hands we can be playing in the situation. So for example, here we can see that small offsuit aces are going to be marginal at best with these assumptions. But for example, deuces would be pretty clear and quite a lot of suited side of the hands we can be shoving. And this is actually quite good hand to check that what sort of differences there is with the ICM, because the ICM option is only going to calculate situation for this hand. It doesn't care about future hands at all. So 22%, there is 4% difference in the ranges. And we can see, for example, that A6 suited here is plus 0.3 and here it's quite a lot smaller. And of course, with FGS1, when our range widens, it also does assume that compared to ICM that players behind us are going to play wider. So to get more realistic situation, it might be good to, as I said before, that go through these ranges that are they reasonable. I think quite many will be folding a bit more in these situations facing UTG shove. But yeah, that's the basic use for the basic hand. And then there is this advanced hand, which can be checked through about different sort of situation. For example, if someone is limping or if we are doing 3 bets and so on. So if we edit here, let's create some sort of situation that we are, let's say, something like that, and we are then interested that what we can be shoving, for example, against 2PP open. We can also fold, like let's say that we are interested about situation that button is min raising. We can fold the other earlier players to have smaller amount of calculations needed. And then the program will give the ranges that are going to be like basically if players are playing optimally as min raising and 3-bet shoving. And again, we want to of course first look through that is this 40% range reasonable, and then we'll lane calling range what we assume him to be calling against 20 pp shove, for example. And if those both feels reasonable, then we get what sort of hands we can be 3-bet shoving. And then there's also, like, you can define here different sort of, did it give any? Not really, but you can define 2 pp, 3 pp all in. So it will create basically action trees for all of these possibilities. That wheel lane is opening 2 pp or 3 pp, and you can also have 3-bet, for example, that for example, if we let's say that it's 2 pp open, we can have, for example, 5 pp and all in 3-bets. So it should now create 3-betting ranges for 500 sizing and shoving separately here, as we can see. Button is min raising, and now we have separated ranges for 3-betting small and so on. So this can be used for a bit more complicated pre-flop stuff. But of course, one of the downsides or things that Hoarder Resources doesn't account is, for example, that in here that, of course, like for especially PP will be also flatting big amount of time, but the problem with his flat calls is that it assumes that hands will be going to showdown. Basically that both players are just checking, and I think it creates much more problems than any increased value in most cases. So I wouldn't personally be using that at all. And then you have the options to do, for example, you can filter big amount of hands from certain situations and use this from hand history files. But I think we have been, I actually might have already some of the hands here on the, can't really remember what games there were, but you can choose some file where you have imported those hands and then use Shift to select these all and click quick analyze here. So if these have been 6max games, I don't remember, but you want to be filtering certain kind of format from your tracker before, so that we are not analyzing 9max games with 6max structure, for example. And we can then go through huge amount of hands in pretty quick way and then evaluate, and we can then find different sort of situations. And for example here 9-4 off, we can check show history, and it has been 6max table where I have been shoving 9-4 from small blind in this sort of situation against another small stack. So it will show it as mistake 1.15%, and in NAS ranges this is definitely bad shove, but then in real life, if wheel lane has been, for example, tight looking or like recreational players, they are often not calling as wide as they should. So for example, in this hand, if wheel lane is calling, let's say 40% of time, then any two shoving is going to be clearly profitable. So it's not necessarily mistake, even if it's listed as mistake here, especially on those situations where you are yourself shoving. But this can be a pretty nice tool to go through big amount of hands. And personally, I haven't used this from SQL database, but should be working directly from the tracker. Not sure if it how does it work, if it works. Then also, for example, in this situation, if we are interested that when, if I have some total crappy hand, for example, like 7 deuce off, that when is it going to be unprofitable to be shoving, and how to look it? Well, one option is that we change the ranges here and see that how does it change, but it's kind of ugly way to be doing it. It's much easier to use the plot function. So if we choose the PP plot range versus hand equities and click small blind, we can select that small blind is shoving 7 deuce off, and we can then directly see here that if PP is calling for this 7.5%, so we can see here directly what is the required range, and then we can edit here for the 7.5 and see if it's reasonable or not. And we can also check different hands. So we can have that, we can, for example, 3 deuce suited. We can take any sort of hands here and have them all shown in the same graph, so we can see that the king 8, for example, and these 7-6 suited are always profitable to be shoving, no matter the villain calling range. One of the tricky spots often when you add multiple hands here is that the colors can be kind of close to each other, so it can be sometimes kind of tricky to see what is what, so to say. And Nafrop saying that the devs are saying that we should be using SQL import. Well, I haven't tried it, but might be good. Don't want to try it now during the coaching, because there is certainly coming some sort of demo effect. Whole tool crashing or something. But anyway, then there is also something I personally sometimes use is this. If I want to share this calculation, we can use this share hand, and we then get a link into the hand, which is now on the Hold'em resources servers, and someone else can then go through the calculation themselves here, that the results have been with these ranges. So I think this is something convenient as well. And there are also other type of stuff here with the plot. Haven't been using these others that much. But pretty convenient tool for pre-flop situations. And then and for Twitch at Hyperviper, I think those comments were for the ICM Explorer. Yeah, it's more about the understanding of ICM in a way, that how high is the ICM tax in different sort of situations, that I have been personally using it. because I think it's kind of easier to understand compared to that you just check from hold'em resources that you can't really call with some sort of hand, for example ace king, but it's kind of more easily understandable when you see that you actually need 70% of equity against the villain range. So yeah, then post-flop stuff. Well, basically, when you are analyzing some sort of post-flop situation, of course, it starts from the pre-flop side. What happens on the pre-flop will define your opponent range, what is going to be on the flop, and his actions on the flop will somewhat define his range and so on. So basically, when you are playing, you usually check your HUD if you have some additional info, and you can try to define villain range. For example, if you have some sort of Reki guy opening from early position in full table, you usually can define villain range quite decently, because there is going to be just kind of limited amount of hands that can be profitably open raised from that position. Or if you have some rec opening from bottom, you might have enough sample size that you can use like bottom steal statistics, for example, to think about his range. Often with recreational type of players, it's going to be harder because they don't have like same logic on their play. They are more often going more with the feeling side, so to say, than any mathematical logic. But you can also against them use the VPI, PPFR, and even if they might have, for example, if you have some sort of player who has, let's say, 50/30 statistics opening from UTG, he can have a lot of stuff, but you can also expect that he has quite easily way too wide ranges and so on. And if we think about some sort of example for post-flop, do we have anything we could use in the hand analysis? Well, one good example might be that if we are opening, let's say, ace queen or ace jack from early position, and then we have middle position caller who is like really high VPIP player, we can quite often go for bet, which could also, maybe it's easier if I find some sort of hand to show, for example, might be more easier time to talk about it. So, for example, if I want to find that sort of hand, let's say that it's ace queen or ace jack, my position is early position, it's unopened, and then let's say that we want to have effective stack size, let's say greater than 20 pp, and we probably get some sort of situation. We could actually also, for the example, I was going to say we want to have port texture filter high card of ace, so there is ace on the flop as well. Only finding, there was also all in pre-flop true, so that's why it was so hard to find any hands. Well, anyway, if we have this sort of situation, for example, in heads-up pot that we are opening from early position, and here on the button we would have someone calling. If we have read that villain is high VP, IP, or fizzy player, or so on, we could quite easily go always for bet line in this sort of flop, in heads-up pot at least. But then if we have, because we basically assume against fizzy player that they can be playing a lot of weaker AX, even the weakest offsuit aces by calling, and they can also overvalue 10x as well, additional to AX, so we can then go for bet 3 streets of value easily with this sort of hand. But then if we have someone pretty tight looking player, let's say like this, for example this guy Dr. Laborant, then it might be that his calling range, if he had called pre-flop, it might be that it doesn't have that many weaker aces. So if he had called, then we might not want to be taking line to bet 3 streets, because he might not have that many weaker hands. So by using our info on the villains, we can then evaluate our actions. And in here it would be actually spot where we could be folding even against 2 possibly fizzy guys. 3-4 off. Well, that's not the biggest deal. But yeah, the post-flop side starts from the pre-flop, and I think tool like Flopzilla is pretty nice in a way that if we can define in some case that villain is opening, for example, in some spots, would be of course better to have some sort of real situation we would be analyzing, but let's say that villain is opening this sort of range, we can then choose here that if we are defending with from big blind, for example, against some middle position open raise with, let's say, 10-9 off, and then if the flop comes something like Queen 10-8 rainbow, for example, we can, here it should be showing, yeah, there's this conflict, the exact same card, so it's not possible situation. But here we can basically see that how does the villain hand flop here, that he has top pair 22% of time, and and so on. And here we can see the program calculating that the equity of range, this range we define on the left, is 28% on this flop, and our hand equity against this range is going to be 52%. So on this flop, our hand would be a bit ahead of this range. Basically, when we are then evaluating, analyzing the hand further, we then have to check that what the villain is doing. For example, if we see betting queen then 8 is not necessarily flop, that villain might be c betting overly wide, so we would then limit the hand range by his action. So if he's c betting, he probably quite easily has, for example, all the sets, so those we can easily keep. Maybe he would be checking nines. He might be full or semi-bluffing maybe some portion of these. Maybe checking something like ace 10 or ace 8. And he might or might not be betting those other combos of 10x. So this way we limit villain range compared to the board and his actions, and we get then our equity against his range. And then if the turn comes, I think we can also click here, but we can also, well, with these random numbers, it's basically adds random turn, and we can then check that, well, how our range is then. And if he's then betting again on the turn, then we should be again making some assumptions that how does it affect his range and how our hand will be doing against that range. So I think this is okay, pretty nice tool for post-flop analyzing. Of course, this tool doesn't make, like, I think I haven't been using these tools that make like GTO optimal ranges for different sort of post-flop, pre-flop situations, but this can be used as help for analyzing post-flop situations, that with what assumptions you get enough equity with your hand and so on. And basically, if villain is c betting something like this, then basically if he's c betting like half pot, we would be needing 25% of equity to call, and we have 45%, so it would be pretty easy call, and so on. I have been personally using sometimes this tool for post-flop situations. I think it's pretty okay. I think Folger's Stove is kind of similar tool. I haven't been using that one personally. And for Nafrop, that unfortunately there is no tool for, or at least software for tilt reducing, I would say. Or yeah, maybe Danita's suggestion that music player might keep yourself relaxed. I could have also found some hand ready for some post-flop analyzing, would have been made it more easy to go through this tool. yeah, I think the basic use can be understood from what I have said so far, or what is the opinion of the viewers. Basically, if we check, for example, say that we do hit 9 of spade on the turn and villain is going to bet, we can assume that he's usually not going to be betting on this sort of board. Of course, Jack X, he's likely to be betting, but something like top pair combos, he's probably not going to be bluffing with. He might have some sort of not actually sure how was it done. But anyway, he might have some sort of flush draws he's bluffing with. But I think we should be using it here, that apply. So it only takes these spade combos. Usually aces or kings would be checking as well. So it's kind of situation where villain betting range tends to be polarized, that we can, for example, keep some combo of set here, but usually villain would not be betting on turn with 2 pair or set combos that often. He might have maybe some of the ace king shooter type of hands as semi-bluff combos. And for example, against this sort of range, that would be kind of value heavy. We would only have 23% with our hand anymore. But if we then decrease, for example, queens, add a bit more of the semi-bluffs, then it becomes more reasonable bluffing hand. And if he turns some sort of weaker hand, that, let's say, he had something like king 8 suited, for example, if he's turning that into bluff on this pro board, then our equity of course increases. Yeah, and I haven't been using this that much, so, but I think there is probably some sort of tutorial videos available as well to get further on the tool. And that's also, I think it was pretty cheap tool overall. So did I have anything else on the well, not really. Well, here Nafrop had been asking on the tool coaching topic about different stuff. I think we already, well, yeah, stats which are useful to low to medium sample sizes. As we gone through that, VPR, PPF are basically the main things I often read when checking someone who I don't have much sample with, because something like 3-bet, it will be requiring decent amount of sample and so on. So, and especially post-op statistics will be demanding a lot of sample size. And on the APP and PP, I think we already went through that. And after this basic HUD, I would think about adding those steal statistics and PP fault to steal, possibly 3-bet. And we went relatively quickly through the basic functionality of hold'em resources, and basically basically it's the quickest to learn yourself by doing it yourself. So big hands, analyze them, change the ranges in the way you think they are. There is question about have I been playing on stars and did you get to Supernova? Well, in 2014 I met Supernova Elite, and previous year I did the Supernova, something like 200k PPP points if I remember correctly. And this year I haven't been really playing in PokerStars, mainly because of their recent politics, so to say. And there was also a comment about Danitas using the hold'em resources to check those same sort of situation than ICM Explorer, but I noticed this like 10 minutes before the coaching, so I haven't been really reading it throughout so far. But I think this was what I wanted from this coaching. And if you have some sort of feedback to give, that was this something you expected, or was it lacking from some area or so on, you can give your feedback on our forums. But thanks for active commenting and questions from the chat, and good evening for whatever you are doing. Next week we will have this same sort of coaching as Finnish, so will be easier for some people who are not maybe as fluent with English. Not that I would be personally that great in it either, but hopefully understandable at least. But yeah, thanks for watching, bye.